Hello, hello, hello. I'm so excited for today's conversation. Today, I have Tracy Cornell with me. As a former corporate leader, leadership coach, and facilitator for 25 years, working primarily for a large global bank, Tracy created her own business and has been an entrepreneur for the past 5 years. It wasn't until she began exploring her human design and gene keys chart that she realized she still was not doing the work she loved, which was due to not being aligned with her design and what she was truly meant to do in the world. Now, Tracy combines timeless leadership coaching principles with the power of human design and gene keys, helping women identify and achieve their goals and step into the life and work she was meant to have. I love that, Tracy. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I know this much. And for those of you listening, it's like I'm showing just a tiny bit about human design. And I've heard about gene keys, but I really don't know much about that. So
hmm
I'm excited to have that conversation today.
hmm
I know one of the things I learned about my human design is I'm a manifesting generator, and I'm I respond to things, and that has like opened it has almost given me permission to understand. Like for years I was saying I'm not creative, I'm not creative, I'm not creative, and I've shifted that language a little bit because I'm just not creative like my friends who are artists, but I am creative in my own way. But for me, what it was is starting from scratch. Like to me, that's where I struggled. But if somebody said to me, hey Francine, we want you to do a workshop on XYZ, I could do it. But if somebody said, hey Francine, we want you to do a workshop, it paralyzes me.
So I often like to call that, it's so funny you said that, the blank page syndrome,
Oh my
right?
God, it's so true. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Chat GPT. Like, I don't even know how we survived before it,
Correct.
but it really
Correct.
has, I've trained it enough and I'm like, hey, based on what you know about me, what's a good topic for me to have a workshop? And then I'm like, I like this one, right? But it really is, it has given me permission to be okay with not being able to to be able to create on that blank canvas.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so many directions I can go with what you just said. And you giving us permission or giving us that validation,
Yeah.
right? And I was just speaking about this in one of my coaching groups because there's many different facets to our human design and our gene keys and your type. You had said you're a manifesting generator, so am I. And in part of the way that I use human design, I use another facet. It's human design for business. And
Okay.
it's a little different way that we talk about things. So the manifesting generator is also known as the express builder.
Tell me more. What does that mean?
Well, it means the same thing as your manifesting
Okay.
generator, meaning um, we like to go, we love to get work done, but it has to be work. And so this is one of my big ahas. We have to do work that lights us up, and we have to do work that we love.
Yeah.
And you had shared an example where you felt like finally gave you permission. That's probably one of my areas where for years I liked different facets of some of the work I was doing, mostly when I was in corporate, but there were other things that just weren't making me excited, and I would think something was wrong with me. Like, why can't I just do this job? There's many people that don't love the work they do and they're doing it. What why can't I just do that? And I know it was this validation. It was finally I gave myself the permission to pursue what it is that I love to do. And
Hmm.
I love the premise of your work and your podcast where you just want to have fun.
Right.
And I'll share this quick little story. In a lot of the leadership coaching work, and I do work with corporate a little bit, still, even with doing the work I'm doing now. And so one of the first times I myself did a values exercise,
Yep.
it was a card sort, right? And we had to take like 50 values. And this, I do this with my clients too, but I had to go through it first and prioritize all these value words on these cards. And of course, fun, I picked
One of my top three. Yep.
first and foremost,
Yep.
but I put it back.
Ooh.
I didn't prioritize it. I said, oh, well, fun. Yeah, fun. But no, I can't pick that. I can't talk about fun being of value when it comes to the work I do. That's not exciting and that's not corporate and that's not right. And so I kind of pushed that down for a long time until finally I didn't.
Yeah.
Right. Um, and so it's so interesting. That's just one small example of the reason why I've introduced this work into what I do is because think of how powerful it can be when you not only uncover things like what you said about being a manifesting generator and it gave you the permission to be creative in your own way,
Yeah.
right? And then that's one facet, like being a manifesting generator, it's one facet of your design. And when you layer on all of the other pieces, like we could probably pretty quickly determine, why is it that your creativity comes out when you're pointed in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
We could pinpoint that. So
I love
it's
that.
so fascinating.
Well, let's just take a step back and why
Yeah, yeah,
don't you
yeah.
share with, I know I was like, let's just get in, but share with the listeners, your journey, right? Because you were in corporate, right? You were a COVID entrepreneur, similar to me. Um, and mine was, I was laid off in 2019, at the end of 2019, right? I was still looking for a job. And then COVID happened and somebody was like, "Hey, are you coaching?" And I was like, "Sure, because what the fuck else am I doing besides painting my house right now?" Um, so I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So why don't you just share your journey of, how you made the transition?
Mhm. Sure. So I knew, um, and it's something we know deep inside of us, whether it's outward or maybe even still subconscious. I knew that I wanted to have my own business. I knew that for years, but I didn't tap into it. And we can go into all of the reasons why we don't tap
Right.
into it, right? We're afraid, we can't take the leap. Oh, I have this and right, all the
We'll make the
things.
money. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. There's so much conditioning there around
Yeah.
what having your own business we think it looks like. So I too, and I was in learning and development for 25 years. I actually had started my career in sales. And when I was in learning and development, I really enjoyed most of that work. But what happens when you're in that type of role is when corporations need to restructure, that's one of the areas they tend to go to first.
Right. Which is probably the last area they should restructure.
Right. Right. And it's funny, I'll never forget this. I had a little different career trajectory and I was in sales and I had an opportunity to leave my sales position and go into sales training because I really enjoyed it. And I'll never forget what my sales manager said to me. And this was 25 years ago. Just be careful because you're now leaving a revenue driving role and now you're part of the fat that can be trimmed.
Yeah.
Right. That was a piece of advice that he gave me back then. And I said, oh, no, fine. And I had been part of several restructures and layoffs, and me as well. One came in 2020,
Yeah.
right around COVID. And it was maybe your listeners can relate to this. It was the final push that I needed to bring that little voice in my head forward. Now, it didn't hurt that I also turned 50 in 2020.
I just turned 60 less than a month ago.
Yeah,
So like like that, wow, what am I really going to do this for the rest of my life? Come on,
right.
let's have
Uh-huh.
some fun. Yep.
Yeah. So I had, the big aha moment. Now I had turned 50 when we were in the depth of COVID.
Yeah.
My 50th birthday, I staring out the window right now. I sat in my driveway drinking champagne, and that's when people were driving by in their
Right,
cars.
right, right. Yep.
Right? That's how I spend. But it gave me time to really, just pause
Yeah.
and really say to myself, okay, enough is enough. This is your time. And I took that leap in 2020, and
Yeah.
here I am. And so something funny happened though. So I jumped right in, and I often share, maybe you can relate to this, Francine. I often share with people that you don't really realize this until you get in it, but starting your own business uh, is your biggest professional and personal development journey you're ever going to go on.
Oh my God, yes. I was laid off from a job probably 8 years, 7, 8 years ago. And I used to run call centers and they were going to outsource the call center. So they asked me to stay to the end and I was going to get a generous severance package to stay. And I said, yes, this is my time to do this coaching thing. I can finally do it full time. And I realized shortly after, I didn't like being home alone. Like, I really thrive in teams. I really love leading teams and being part of a community. So after a few months of really, I wasn't getting my business off the ground because I didn't know how, right? Like there's no handbook on how to be an entrepreneur. And I wasn't, like you said, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I just wanted to coach. I didn't care. Like if there was a full-time job coaching, I would have done it. But there really isn't, it doesn't allow that. The difference in 2020, everyone else was home too. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it was an easier transition for me.
Sure.
I say to people all the time, I'm the only person in the world that doesn't hate Zoom. Like to me, because fun is one of my top values, and so is connections. So I need to be connected. And I just recently, so I just did the values assessment again. And I used to have connections, fun, and enthusiasm. And I actually shifted it to connections, fun, and leadership
Mm.
because no matter where I am, even when I'm trying not to be a leader, I'm still a leader. And I'm realizing like that is in everything, every area of my life. And I think that enthusiasm and fun is intertwined, but
Mm.
yeah, it really isn't for the faint of heart, right? Being an entrepreneur is, there's, a lot of people will say you quit your 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 9 to 5, so you can work 7 days a week.
Absolutely. And there's a mindset shift that needs to take place.
Yes.
There's a different, excuse me, way you need to show up. There's a different way you need to approach problems because no one else is going to solve them for you, right?
Right.
And I can keep going on and on. And you don't realize that till you get in it, right?
Right.
And so, of
And then
course,
you're like, shit, what did I do? Now I'm here. I'm gonna figure this
right?
out.
And it's so funny because when I started my business 5 years ago, I thought, well, of course. I mean, I was a leadership facilitator and did some internal coaching, and I really enjoyed that work. So I was like, well, I'm just going to take what I love doing in my corporate job and I'm going to do it on my own. And I had many colleagues who did something similar. So of course, it's a great transition, right? I'm going to use air quotes here. It's going to be easy. It's not like I'm going to go and open a bakery. I'm going to just continue doing what it is that I was
Right.
doing. And in some ways, that did make it easier because I knew what to deliver to the client. But there's a whole other aspect of that, right? When you're doing it on your own. All that to say, I've done some great work. I've worked with some great clients, but about 2 years into that, I started just not feeling that level of satisfaction that I thought I would starting my own business.
Mm,
And you better believe that that was really hard. I kept kind of pushing it down, like, oh, it's just because no, and you're fine. And it wasn't until I joined this coaching program where we started working with our own human design strategies, and I started learning about my own. And it's when I had this kind of epiphany, like, I don't think I'm really enjoying the work I'm doing in my own business. And going into it, and maybe some of your listeners can relate to this, you do think a little bit like, oh, leaving corporate and starting my own business, that's going to make me happy. And I'm using air
Right.
quotes when I say that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't bringing the amount of satisfaction I thought it would. And when I finally let that leave my lips,
Mm,
I had, this epiphany. And it was really hard because I had invested a lot of time. I had invested resources. I had made financial investments, right? I didn't even want to tell my husband,
right.
right? That, I'm thinking about making a shift. Because, and this is back to what we were talking about in the very beginning, I know with 100% certainty that I thrive when I'm doing the work that I love. That's my zone of genius,
Right. Why?
1000%.
Same. We had this conversation before we started recording. I love this part of the podcast because this is my zone of genius, the editing and the doing. That's why I don't edit because that is not where I shine and it makes it not fun for me. Right? I could
Mm-hmm.
talk to you all day long, but having to go and edit it and then make a clip and put it on social media, it's part of the process. So I have to do it because I love this part. But knowing that, and then at some point outsourcing it, right, will make it so that I love it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And as an entrepreneur, you have the luxury of doing that
Right.
and identifying, and we should be doing that. Like, surround yourself with people that have different skills than you do, right?
And that's what I used to love about leading teams, right? I
Mm-hmm.
often
Same.
joke that, when I became an entrepreneur, I was like, so this needs to get done, and this needs to get done, and this needs to get done. I'm like, oh shit, I have to be the one to do that? There's going to be a problem. I used to have great teams that worked for me. I had the ideas and they did the things, and then we all came back together, and then right? So as an entrepreneur, you're in sales, you're in marketing, you're in, you're in editing, you're in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't always your zone of genius. Your zone of genius is like for me, it's coaching, it's working with my clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, you have to learn these other skill sets. And sometimes it's not as fun. So
Mm-hmm.
let's talk a little bit about human design
Sure.
because, there may be some people that are listening. I feel like human design, and this is probably just because it's in my zone, it's only been the last few years that I've really been hearing more and more about it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been around for a long time. But just explain to people at a high level what
Yeah.
it is. And then I want to understand the gene keys because I've only heard about those. A friend of mine mentioned them to me last year. So I don't really know that much about the gene keys. And I want to dig into that a little bit too.
Sure. Absolutely. So human design has been around for a long time, and the founder, Ra Uru, that's who created human design. And so it exists in several different formats, right? So you might see people talking about, like, how we started our conversation, the different types, manifesting generators, for example, is one of them. Um, and I'll talk about human design by telling you a little story about how I was introduced to it. So I was working with a business coach who introduced it within her community. And to be honest, Francine, when I first was introduced to it, I thought, I'm not quite
A
sure
little
about
too
this.
woo.
Right. Well, I use the phrase woo woo quite a
Right.
bit. And I've seen some things online. Maybe your listeners have as well. There's a big I'll say astrology component to it,
Yeah.
which is very interesting to many people. It's just not as interesting to me. However, the coach I was working with at the time, she what became certified through the BG5 Institute, which talks about human design from a business perspective. So
Okay.
it takes the concepts of human design, but they're introduced a little different way. So, for example, I said in the beginning, the different types are identified differently. The words that we use are a little bit different. And maybe I'm just going to give one small example for any of your listeners that know a little bit about human design. But for example, so manifesting generators are called express builders, generators are builders. Um, Manifestors are initiators in the human design for business, and projectors are known as advisors. And so that's just a very small example. And
Right. So
so,
it takes the woo-woo out of it, right? Because you think
yes.
manifesting in a corporate setting may not go over as well.
Right. And it can be used in a corporate setting.
Right.
It also can be used, in any setting, and that's where I'm really using it with my clients right now. And another example I'll share, if any of your listeners are familiar with what channels are. So channels are when two gene keys or gates or traits are connected. There's so much power there to learn what your channels are. But in human design for business, they're called strengths.
Mm,
And I like to go one step further and call them your superpowers, because that's what they are.
right.
And so when I was introduced to it from this perspective, using more practical language, because that's me, right? I
Well,
love to have fun.
and I will say the first when I've had my chart done twice over the last, call it 5 years, um, and the last time I had one done, she wasn't talking in practical language for me,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot for my brain to take in. So then I'm like, I got one little piece, like the response piece that landed, but talking about all the other things felt like so esoteric to me that I couldn't relate to how this related to me. I need examples. Like I'm a practical person. I'm a visual learner, right?
Yeah.
Like give me examples so that I can then understand it. And I think that that's important to be able to speak to the way that the person can understand it too.
Yes, 1000%. And I'm just like you. And, and it didn't resonate with me the first time around for many of the reasons that you just shared. However, when it was put in front of me from the business perspective, and again, I'm using the word business, it's human design for business,
Yeah,
but you don't necessarily just need to use it within corporations, right?
sure.
I've really resonated with the language, how to explain things, how to debrief it. And frankly, one of the first things that I like to do is help clients see, how do you use this in your life?
Mm,
Right? Because you can learn about your type and you can learn the way you respond to situations. You had mentioned that. Um, you could talk about your life's work. You can talk about your strengths or channels, all these different things. But what does that mean in your life? And so I really have been studying for the past 2 years, to be honest, to distill this down using a lot of the human design for business language to make it make sense, because I needed it to make sense for me.
right. So that you can then explain it to others.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
And once I got my hands wrapped around the power of my own design, I said, I can help people with this.
Mm.
I want to help people with this. This is so powerful. And I'll share one more example if I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason that I find this so incredibly powerful is, again, coming from the corporate world and being in leadership and coaching. I have been certified in all sorts of assessments,
Sure.
right? DISC, Hogan, Myers-Briggs, Strength
Yeah.
Finders, you name it. And those are all great. But the thing that I noticed between those tools and human design is that first, you are answering anywhere. I don't know if you've ever done any of those, but you're
Oh yeah.
answering,
Yep.
let's call it 75 to 100 questions,
Right.
right? You're answering those questions with your conditioned mind.
Mm.
And so the results that spit out are, are there things that you resonate with? Sure, I resonated with a lot of things about my own assessments, but it's your mind answering those
Right.
questions. And the other piece is that it's talking about who you are right now in this moment, that snapshot in time. If Francine were to take a Strength Finders assessment on March, what's today, 5th,
If
that's the assessment of you right now.
right.
But what your human design body graph is it shows you your potential.
Mm.
And the combination of those two things, where, this is your unfiltered you that your conditioned mind had nothing to do with, right? And it shows you not only where you are right now, and yes, some of the things that are holding you back, which we can talk a little bit about that, but it also shows you your potential
I
of
love that.
what you're meant to do and where you're meant to go. And that's really what made me say, I need to use this to help people.
I love it. So tell me, what are the gene keys and how do they relate
Yes.
to the human design?
Yes. So Richard Rudd is the founder and creator of the Gene Keys, and he actually was a former student of Ra Uru, who's the founder and creator of Human Design, and he created the Gene Keys, and as a way, like thinking we were just saying, the human design can be a little esoteric, especially if you ever listen to any recordings of Ra Uru, right? It can be a little much,
Yeah.
right? For some people. And so Richard Rudd said, you know what? I want to take what he felt were some of the key components of your human design, because there's a lot in there. And I'm going to extract what I feel are the most important things. And I'm going to create the gene keys. And so your gene keys is, I call it a simplified version of your human design body graph.
Okay.
And so, for example, your body graph there, it shows you the 64 gene keys and the ones that are ignited for you, right? And lots going on there. The gene keys is 13 of the gene keys. So 13 out of 64. So that right there, you're simplifying it down. And Richard Rudd identified 13 traits or gates, using a human design term, and displayed them in a gene keys graph that can tell you the most important pieces about your design, but in a simplified way.
I love that.
So, relatively quickly, without going super deep into your body graph, you can get a pretty good sense of your life's work. And then there's some other components too.
Okay.
Your top 4 gene keys make up about 70% of your body graph. And so it's a nice introduction.
I was going to say, is it more of an introduction for somebody who has never heard these terms, doesn't know what it is? Because the human design can feel overwhelming.
It absolutely can. And what I've found with my clients that I've worked with, I actually introduce your Gene Keys report first.
Yeah, it feels like it might be a more simplified version.
Yeah, and it's a great place to start. And a great way to think of it, I heard this analogy from my coach. Think of when let's say you hurt your knee, right? You
I'm recovering
fall.
from knee replacement surgery. That's a great
Oh,
example.
perfect. I recently had a hip replacement. We'll
I
have
had
to
the
chat
hip
about that.
last year. I had the hip in October of 23 and the knee in October of 24.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll love this analogy, Francine. So you had all the scans done, right?
Yeah.
So think of your Gene Keys report as an ultrasound,
Okay.
right? So it gives you that initial, right? You can kind of see what's going on. But then when the doctor says, you know what, we're going to go a little bit deeper, I need a deeper view of this, and they send you for
Yeah.
the MRI is your human design body graph.
Okay. What a beautiful analogy. All right. Yeah. So, how can you explain how human design and gene keys can help women step into alignment with who they're meant to be? Because that's the
Mm-hmm.
work that you're doing, because
Mm-hmm.
that's, I know that was kind of where you were at. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do you bring that together to help them?
Yeah. So what I like to do, and so I think I've shared in the time we've been talking, I am a very simple, practical, what does this mean? What do I do with this type person? And so that's my approach to when I use human design with clients, right? I want it to be simple, easy, and what does this mean to you? And so starting with the gene keys, we get a introduction to what all of this is. I then explain other pieces. For instance, your profile or your public role is another key component. And this is the way I like to explain that is it's how we're meant to be seen in the world.
Mm.
And it's so interesting when I share with people based on your profile, what your public role is. That's another area that people, they have a reaction to it and they feel seen. And oh, well, that makes total sense. And so I take an approach where we walk through all of the ways that we are meant to show up in the world and the things that attract other people to us, things that we might realize. So I'll have somebody say, oh my gosh, yes, that makes total sense. Or, wow, I never thought of it that way.
Mm.
I then combine that with talking about our shadows. And
Ah,
so,
yeah.
yes. And you and I have been in the professional and personal development space for a little while now. So I'm going to use some terms you're going to
Yeah.
probably relate to, limiting beliefs, shadows, right? All of that. And we talk about that in the coaching space.
Yeah.
But the powerful thing about human design and the gene keys, because in your gene keys, you see 13 of your shadows, is that you see your specific shadows and things that are holding you back, and they're specific to you.
Mm. And then it
So,
gives you opportunity to actually work on them, right? So that you can work on whatever that shadow is. And, shadow is not bad. I just had this
no,
conversation with a client the other day. I was like, you can be a flaming asshole and be love and light. But if you don't own the fact that you're a flaming asshole, you can't
yeah.
own the fact that you're love and light. So it's knowing that you can be both. And how do I work with that?
Oh, 100%. And so that's so funny you say that because with each one of the gene keys, and so I'm going to use a couple of terms just to connect some things. And this may sound familiar to some of your listeners. So Richard Rudd calls them gene keys. In human design, they're called gates or traits. They're all the same. And
Yeah,
there are 64 of them. And so when we talk about shadows, each of us has some combination of those 64 shadows. But guess what? And it's a specific word, and we
sure.
talk through it. There's also wisdom
Mm,
associated with each one of those.
right.
And then there's also an ultimate higher, I'll say the word essence, right? For lack of a better, but when you can move through that thing that's holding you back and tap into the wisdom, there's even more opportunity for you on the other side of that.
Right.
And so, just as you just said, it's a very specific map to, right? We all have those things that are holding us back, but oh, that's the goodness that's sitting on the other side of when I, get past, I'll just use the word overwhelm off the top of
Sure.
my head.
Yeah.
For instance, one of my most important gene key, my life's work is the 24, and my shadow with that is addiction.
Mhm. I talk about the addiction to busyness. Like most of my clients are in overwhelm and they're addicted to busyness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you're going to love this. Guess what's on the other side of addiction for me?
The word that comes up is freedom.
Right? Well, that's also there. And the specific word is creation.
Mm, right. Yeah, because if you're in addiction, you can't create anything new because you're just in the same cycle of whatever it is you're addicted to. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So now knowing that, how does
mhm,
that help you in your day to day?
mhm. So I was just going to share that's been one of my biggest ahas. I've actually had several, for me personally, I've had several major ahas. Um, and identifying, because you can take the word addiction and take it at face value, but really, and this is what I encourage my clients to do, is you need to think about, where does this show up in your life?
Mm,
What does this mean for you? What does it really mean? And it's not a one and done. Like the way I like to talk about it is human design in the gene keys. It's the study of you.
mm,
And when we, probably in a way that we haven't before, and when we dive into the study of ourselves and really take, I'll just keep going with my example of addiction and creation. It's taken on a different meaning from when it was first introduced to me a couple of years ago. I kind of took it literally, if you will,
sure. Yep.
because I had to go deeper with it. And when you can do that, it unlocks like these kind of mind patterns, these thoughts, right, that we keep having, that are holding us back, and we might not even realize it.
I love that.
And we use a lot of different phrases in the coaching world, like, getting past your imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just that's the first one that just came to mind.
Right.
But how do we do that? And the beautiful thing about this work is there is a specific roadmap for you, but for each person, because every single person's is different.
Right.
Every single person. For example, you and I are both manifesting generators or express builders, but I can guarantee you, and we may have a couple of other things in common
Sure.
with ours. I can just kind of tell we might have
Yeah.
some similarities, but we are very different,
Right. I love that.
right?
So I want to talk a little bit about reinvention at midlife because a lot of
Yes.
our listeners are midlifers. You and I both are. You must be 55 now. I just turned
Turning.
60, which I'm still working on saying that out loud. Um, so how I know you shared with me that everyone was asking your kids who are right, like what do you want to be when you grow up, right? What do you want to do? But nobody is asked, like you were like, why is not anyone asking me that, right? Why do you think that is, that we just get to a place in our lives where, hey, this is who you are and this is what you do, and just be happy with it? And then how do we reinvent ourselves? And I remember when I was in my 40s, I was quitting a job. I had been at the company for 8 years. There was literally nothing. I'm still friends with the owner of the business. It was a small business, and his brother owned a business that supported ours, and we shared office space. And an employee of his brother's said to me, and he was probably around my age. He might have been a little bit younger. He was like, "You're quitting your job you're quitting the job at your age." And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like 40, like I don't even know if I was 45 at the time. I was like, what do you mean at my age?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So there is this story around, you have a job, stay with the job and just hold on to it. But let's talk a little bit about that because I'm sure some of our listeners, I mean, I know I work with a lot of women. I work with women entrepreneurs, but I also work with women in corporate that have a side gig or
Mm-hmm.
want to leave corporate to be an entrepreneur and, maybe make their side gig a bigger thing. But there's fear around it because there's stories that society tells us and we tell ourselves.
Oh my gosh, the stories, and I don't know what's more powerful. Maybe for some people, the stories we tell ourselves are more powerful than the society norm of, oh, you, and it starts way before, like, let's say our 40s, 50s, and 60s.
You got to work hard to make money, right? Like
That's
right?
that's exactly it.
Yep.
That's exactly it. You need to go to college, you need to get a good job, you need to save your money, you need to work really hard, and I'm using air quotes, and save your money, and then you work this job, this job, and then hopefully you get to retire, right? And what I'm seeing, and I am seeing a shift, I think you are as well, that doesn't necessarily need to be the case.
Right.
Because what happens for women, right, in that scenario I just shared, for many of us, not all, but for many of us, we do get into that. And then if you decide also to have a family on top of that, um, you just get into the mix. And women, many of us, are so good at putting everybody first,
Oh, 100%.
right? Yeah, and I do it, right? I'm a mom, I do it, and especially when they're younger. And something happens though. And it's funny, yes, I shared that little story. So, on top of this, what I've shared about me already, um, running congruent with that is, like, I'm at the age now where my daughters are getting ready this year. One's graduating from college, the other's graduating from high school. So I am moving into that empty nest
Right.
situation very soon. But I also noticed that my daughters are being asked, "What do you want to do? Right? Who do you want to be? What?" And I really take a note, and I think it's because of this work that I'm doing, that, right, us at the age we're at, we're not being asked that question, right? Very rarely are we
Mhm.
ever asked about our endeavors and our pursuits and our dreams after, let's say, the age of 25,
Right.
right? It's more the one I do get, and this is like just a cultural thing, right? It's habit. If you might be somewhere and someone says, "Oh, what do you do for work?" Right? But we're not being asked, especially as we get older, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? What do you want to create?
I teach a workshop on how to be more by doing more, right? How to do more by being more. And it's really understanding who you be, because that's exactly it. We introduce ourselves as I'm a coach, I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a this. But really, I'm about connections, fun, and leadership. That's who I am. What
Mhm.
I do is so much different than who I am.
Oh, absolutely. It's so true. And I talk about something similar, this concept of stepping into who we want to be or who we need to be, right?
Yeah.
And your human design body graph is shows you right there who you're meant to be. It's all right there. It's the other reason I love it.
So,
But
what's some
when
advice? I mean, we could talk forever, but I'm cognizant of the time.
Yeah,
But
oh my gosh,
uh,
wow.
I know, right?
Time
It's like,
flies when you're having
let's just
fun.
keep talking. So what's some advice that you might give to women that are listening on how they can create some space to explore what's next, especially
Mhm.
when they've spent years focusing on everyone else?
Yeah, and I would say a lot of this is coming from my own experience, right? And so it starts with giving yourself the permission to do it.
Mm,
And because a lot of us, like, this is, we're stuck in that, sometimes we feel guilty, or, for many women who, like, their kids are getting older, it's something we need to process and deal with, and not just say, "Oh, well, okay." So it's giving ourselves the permission, and to then realize, and you have to really believe this, I think, in your heart of heart, that, and aside from all the jokes and memes that are out there, that, midlife, I'll say midlife loosely, because that could
right.
be right, can be about kind of a reawakening, a reassessment, a time to think about what's next. And I heard a great interview. I'll just share this really quick example from the founder and CEO of MIDI Health. If you're
Okay.
familiar with MIDI Health,
Yeah.
um, I heard a podcast where she was being interviewed, and she specifically hires women in their 50s because she's finding that they um, are energized, they're creative, they're coming to the table. And this is what I would love for women to realize about themselves. We have experience, we have wisdom, and for many of us now are moving into a phase where we have more time and freedom than we have in a really long time.
Right.
And how can you allow yourself to dream about what can I do with this?
Mm,
Right. And instead of being in the society norms where, you're looking like, oh, you're in maybe in corporate, you're seeing like a lot of young people being hired and, oh, I'm kind of on my way out. No, this could be your next chapter,
I love
right?
that.
This could be the next chapter, but it starts with really believing that. And I heard this little quote that, midlife is a time, it's not about crisis, it's about creation.
Mm.
And it's never too late to create.
Yeah, I love that. And I would even add, our brain lies to us 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm,
Its sole job is to keep us safe.
mm-hmm,
And when I got laid off in 2019, I did what everyone does. I started looking for a job. And then COVID happened and I started coaching, but I was collecting unemployment, so I was still looking for a job. And what I realized was every time I had an interview, my body constricted. I
mm-hmm,
had anxiety. Every time I coached, I was expansive and in my genius, right? And after that having that happen a few times, I looked at my husband one day and I was like, "So we got to have a conversation."
right.
Because my brain was like, you need to get a job because you need to be, making X number of dollars and blah, 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 blah. But my body was like, no, no, this is what we need to be doing. And it's so important and I remind myself of that because entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart, right? Like the last few years, I've had conversations with most coaches. It's been a rough couple of years in business, right? And you have to be able to ride that out. And like you said, I'm living my passion, right? I'm living what fulfills me and knowing that this is what you're meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
So. I always love to end and ask this question to all of my guests. What is something you live by that you want to share with our listeners?
Oh, I love that question. And the thing, I could probably come up with several different things, but I think the thing in these on our conversation today, where my mind goes to the most is that we are so hard on ourselves. And when we can move from confusion and doubt into having clarity about what we want to do and put ourselves first, I'm thinking of the phrase, we want to, if at no other time, now is the time to live life by design and not by default.
I love that. Live life by design and not default. That might be the title of this podcast. I love when the title comes out in the conversation. So, Tracy, I pull cards at the start of each conversation, and I intuitively grab a deck, and I grabbed the Wealthy Women Oracle deck this morning. So I have three cards in front of me, and I'm going to have you choose. And for those of you listening, I'm going to have you choose two and ask the question if you're a woman, and if you're a man, or however you identify, ask because these are specific types of archetypes, if you will. So, who is here to give me a message today? Might be a good question to ask yourself. So, I have three cards: left, center, right. So I'm going to have you, Tracy, choose
I'm going to go center.
center. Okay. Whew. The midlife, I can't read the card. Sacred stillness. I
Ooh.
love that. And for anyone listening, if you want more details on what the card means, just email me at Francine at Forever Change Coaching and I will let you know. If you chose left, receiving mode. Love that.
Hmm.
And if you chose right, fortress of protection.
Ooh,
Beautiful, isn't it?
yeah.
Oh, Tracy, this conversation was so yummy. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like we could have talked forever.
Me as well. Absolutely.
And
Thank you.
yes. And for those of you listening, thank you for joining me on today's journey towards a more enlightened and fulfilling life. I really hope that today's episode has inspired you to embrace your inner wisdom, navigate your path with a renewed sense of purpose. Remember, transformation begins from within. Take just one moment, 3 deep breaths maybe each day to connect with your higher self and trust that the universe is guiding you towards your highest good. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share it, do all the things to other people and share it with people who might benefit from this message. Your support really helps us reach more souls on their spiritual journey. You can stay connected with mine and Tracy's community. All of our social media links will be in the show notes. Tracy has a freebie that will also be in the show notes. You can visit my website, foreverchangecoaching.com, for any events that are coming up. And until next time, continue to shine your light and walk in peace and love. I am Francine Terrell, and this has been Effin' Fridays with Francine. Tracy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Francine. It's been a pleasure.